It was 4:17 a.m. in the Persian Gulf, and the darkness over the water between the Iranian coast and the Arabian Peninsula was the specific darkness of a moonless night at low latitude. Not the soft darkness of temperate zones, but a hard, absolute black that makes the stars look close and makes everything at sea level invisible, unless it is emitting light of its own. The Gulf was flat. Almost no wind, 3-inch ripples on the surface, the kind of glassy calm that makes radar contacts razor sharp and sonar conditions good, and the world seemed, from the bridge of any ship in the operating area, deceptively peaceful. USS Nimitz, CVN-68, had been operating in the Persian Gulf for 22 days. The oldest nuclear-powered aircraft carrier in active United States Navy service, commissioned in 1975, a vessel that had been operating in these waters through the Iran-Iraq War, through Desert Storm, through every subsequent American military operation that required carrier aviation in the Central Command Theater, was conducting sustained strike operations in support of theater security objectives. Carrier Strike Group 11, USS Princeton, CG-59, the Ticonderoga-class cruiser, was positioned 8 nautical miles ahead of the carrier on the northern axis. 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, USS Higgins and USS Decatur, held screening positions to port and starboard. The air wing was fully embarked, fully armed, and operating on a launch cycle that had been continuous for 22 days. And above the formation, at 23,000 feet in the dark Gulf air, an E-2D Advanced Hawkeye was maintaining the radar picture that made every other element of the strike group's operations possible. The Persian Gulf is 615 miles long and 210 miles wide at its broadest point. At its narrowest, the Strait of Hormuz, it is 21 miles across. Operating a carrier strike group in the Persian Gulf is not like operating in the Pacific or the Atlantic. The water is shallow. The geography is enclosed. The Iranian coast is never more than 100 nautical miles away. The IRGC Aerospace Force's missile sites, dug into the Zagros mountain slopes and the coastal plains of Khuzestan and Fars provinces, are within range of every vessel in the Gulf from the moment they enter through Hormuz. The Persian Gulf is the most missile threat-dense operating environment that any American carrier strike group regularly enters, and the strike group configured for this deployment reflected that assessment in every choice of weapon type, loadout priority, and defensive posture. The IRGC Aerospace Force had been watching the Nimitz for 22 days. Satellites, coastal radar networks, the IRGC Navy's fast patrol craft that routinely operated in proximity to American vessels in the Gulf. The Iranian targeting picture for the Nimitz was continuously updated and accurate to within the parameters that the Khalij Fars missile system's guidance requirements demanded. The Khalij Fars, Persian Gulf, is Iran's domestically developed anti-ship ballistic missile, a weapon that represents the Islamic Republic's most significant investment in the specific problem of threatening American carrier operations in the Gulf that bears its name. It is a short-range ballistic missile derived from the Fateh 110 family, modified with a maneuvering reentry vehicle and an electro-optical terminal seeker that allows it to home on the visual and infrared signature of a large surface vessel in the terminal phase of its trajectory. The guidance concept is straightforward. Loft the missile on a ballistic arc to high altitude, then use the electro-optical seeker in the terminal dive to acquire and track the carrier's distinctive hull shape and guide the warhead to impact. The Khalij Fars was publicly demonstrated in Iranian military exercises beginning in 2011, and its continued development has been a stated priority of the IRGC Aerospace Force for over a decade. Iranian state media has described it as a carrier hunter, with the specific capability to penetrate American ship-based defenses. The IRGC's leadership has repeatedly stated that American carriers in the Persian Gulf operate under the threat of Iranian anti-ship ballistic missiles, and that this threat constrains American freedom of action in the region. On this particular night, at 4:17 a.m., the IRGC Aerospace Force was going to find out whether those statements described reality or aspiration. At 4:03 a.m., 14 minutes before this story's opening moment, the AN/TPY-2 forward-based radar system, operated by U.S. Army Air Defense personnel from a classified site in Qatar, had registered a significant electromagnetic event from the direction of Fars province on the Iranian coast. The specific infrared and radar signature associated with a solid fuel rocket motor igniting on a mobile transporter erector launcher. The launch detection was immediate and unambiguous. The TPY-2's track processing classified the contact within 6 seconds of motor ignition. Ballistic trajectory, short range, launch point consistent with known IRGC Aerospace Force, Khalij Fars operating areas. Track data was transmitted to CTF-53 in Bahrain, to USS Princeton's Aegis combat system, and to the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye on the Tactical Data Network within 9 seconds of the first detection. 9 seconds. The IRGC launch crew had not yet completed their post-launch egress when every relevant element of the American defensive architecture in the Persian Gulf had a complete ballistic track on their missile. The first launch was followed by a second, 11 seconds later. Then a third, 8 seconds after that. Then a fourth and fifth in close succession. The IRGC Aerospace Force executing a salvo launch sequence from multiple TELs at dispersed sites across a 30-kilometer area of coastal Fars province. The dispersion designed to complicate any pre-launch strike against the launch vehicles, and the close spacing of the launches designed to compress the arrival timing of the missiles over the target. 5 Khalij Fars missiles. 5 ballistic tracks. All 5 acquired by the TPY-2 within seconds of launch. All 5 transmitted to the Aegis networks of USS Princeton, USS Higgins, and USS Decatur within 9 seconds of each launch event. The E-2D Hawkeye's AN/APY-9 radar, operating in its ballistic missile detection mode from 23,000 feet, acquired all 5 tracks as the missiles climbed above the radar horizon at 4:04 a.m. The elevated radar position gave the E-2D a track quality on the ascending missiles that the surface ship's own radars could not have achieved at this range. The curvature of the Earth that limits surface radar's lookup geometry was irrelevant to a sensor at 23,000 feet. The E-2D was feeding fire-quality track data on all 5 missiles to the Aegis systems through the cooperative engagement capability link from the moment of acquisition. The Aegis combat system aboard USS Princeton had firing solutions on all 5 Khalij Fars missiles at 4:05 a.m., 1 minute and 52 seconds after the first launch. The TAO aboard USS Princeton called his captain at 4:04 a.m., the moment the first TPY-2 track data appeared in his display. The captain was in the CIC at 4:06 a.m. He looked at 5 ballistic tracks, reviewed the Aegis Systems engagement recommendation, SM-3 Block IIA for the exo-atmospheric intercept layer, SM-6 as a backup for any missile that survived the primary intercept, authorized the engagement posture, and told the TAO to coordinate with the strike group commander. The entire sequence, from the captain entering the CIC to engagement authorization, took 41 seconds. The Khalij Fars missiles were still in their boost phase. Now, let us talk about the Khalij Fars guidance system's fundamental operational problem, because it is the detail that makes the weapon's design ambition and its operational performance two entirely different discussions. The Khalij Fars uses an electro-optical terminal seeker, a camera-based system that, in the terminal dive phase, looks down at the surface of the water and attempts to identify and track the distinctive visual and infrared signature of a large ship. The concept has genuine merit. Electro-optical guidance is not susceptible to the radar jamming that defeats radar-guided weapons, and a large aircraft carrier presents a distinctive thermal and visual signature that an imaging seeker can acquire at useful ranges. The electro-optical approach is also how some of the world's most effective precision-guided weapons operate. The concept is sound. The execution has a specific limitation that the Persian Gulf's operating environment makes particularly significant. Electro-optical seekers require the target to be visible. They require a clear line of sight between the seeker and the target. In the open ocean, in clear weather, this is generally available. In the Persian Gulf at 4:17 a.m., with a flat, dark sea surface and no ambient light, the electro-optical seeker's performance depends entirely on the target vessel's infrared signature. The heat of a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier's machinery spaces, propulsion plant, and exhaust systems radiating upward through the hull and into the space above the ship. A nuclear carrier does generate a significant infrared signature. It also, if the defensive architecture around it has had any warning time at all, deploys countermeasures specifically designed to address the electro-optical guidance problem. Infrared decoys, flare systems, and the specific electronic and thermal countermeasures that American carrier strike groups have carried for exactly this threat since the Khalij Fars' existence became known to U.S. intelligence. The Nimitz had been in MCON-modified posture since the TPY-2's first track data appeared in her CIC at 4:04 a.m. Her countermeasures were active. Her defensive posture was set, and above her, the SM-3 Block IIA interceptors that USS Princeton had launched at 4:09 a.m. were climbing toward the Khalij Fars missiles' trajectories at Mach 15. The SM-3 Block IIA, the weapon that the United States Navy and Japan developed jointly to address exactly the threat that the Khalij Fars represents. The maneuvering ballistic missile with a terminal seeker operating in the exo-atmospheric and upper atmospheric regime, where previous interceptor systems had limited capability. The SM-3 Block IIA's kinetic warhead, the 21-pound Hittile that destroys its target through the sheer kinetic energy of a direct impact at closing speeds measured in kilometers per second, separates from its third-stage booster above the atmosphere and uses its divert and attitude control system to make the final course corrections required to achieve a direct hit on a maneuvering reentry vehicle. The system has been tested extensively, has demonstrated reliable intercept performance in operational testing, and has been employed in live operational conditions in the Red Sea theater against Houthi ballistic missiles, with results that confirmed its design performance. Against the Khalij Fars, the SM-3 Block IIA faced a specific intercept geometry question. The Khalij Fars' maneuvering re-entry vehicle, which performs terminal course corrections to bring the electro-optical seeker's aim point onto the target, introduces trajectory uncertainty in the final phase that the SM-3's kill vehicle must track and compensate for. The Khalij Fars' maneuver capability is less than that of more advanced maneuvering reentry vehicles. Its guidance system is optimized for the electro-optical acquisition problem rather than for defeating interceptors. But it is real, and it means the intercept is not a simple ballistic intercept against a predictable arc. It is a kinematic problem against a target that is maneuvering at velocities above Mach 8, above the atmosphere where the kill vehicle's divert motors must compensate for the target's changes in real time. The Aegis combat system and the cooperative engagement architecture backed by the E-2D's continuous track made this problem tractable. The TPY-2's tracking data, combined with the E-2D's elevated picture and the Princeton's SPY-1B, gave the SM-3 kill vehicle a track quality on the inbound Khalij Fars missiles that allowed the guidance algorithms to predict the maneuver envelope and position the kill vehicle to engage within it, rather than chasing the target's exact position. The difference between chasing and intercepting within the maneuver envelope is the difference between a guidance system designed in the 2000s and one designed in the 1960s. The first SM-3 Block II. A intercept occurred at 4:14 a.m. at an altitude of 148 kilometers above the Persian Gulf, well above the atmosphere, in the silence of near space where neither the hull of the carrier below nor the water of the Gulf was visible. The kill vehicle's infrared seeker acquired the Khalij Fars reentry vehicle at 3.2 kilometers range, tracked its maneuver as the electro-optical seeker attempted to acquire the Nimitz's thermal signature far below, and closed to direct impact at a combined closing velocity that released energy equivalent to several kilograms of high explosive without any explosive charge involved. The Khalij Fars reentry vehicle ceased to exist as a coherent object. Its fragments, scattered across a volume of near space 148 kilometers above the Persian Gulf, began their long fall back through the atmosphere, burning, dispersing, becoming nothing before reaching the surface. Second intercept. 4:14 a.m. plus 31 seconds. The SM-3 kill vehicle for the second Khalij Fars found its target at 141 kilometers altitude. Direct hit. Confirmed kill. Third intercept at 4:15 a.m., 136 kilometers altitude. Fourth at 4:15 a.m., plus 44 seconds, 129 kilometers. All four destroyed above the atmosphere. All four before any of them had completed their terminal seeker acquisition sequence. The electro-optical guidance system that was supposed to find the Nimitz and guide the warhead to her hull had not found anything except the cold infrared background of the upper atmosphere. The carrier below, its countermeasures active, had not been acquired by any of the four destroyed missiles. The fifth Khalij Fars was the most challenging engagement of the sequence. Its re-entry vehicle had performed a more aggressive lateral maneuver early in the descent, a maneuver that pushed it toward the edge of the primary SM-3 kill vehicle's intercept envelope and required the Aegis system to cue the backup SM-6 engagement before the SM-3 result was confirmed. The SM-3 achieved a proximity detonation rather than a direct hit. The kill vehicle passed close enough that the kinetic effect of the near miss shattered the Khalij Fars' guidance system housing and destroyed the electro-optical seeker. But the re-entry vehicle's structural integrity survived. A damaged, guidance-dead Khalij Fars, continuing on its last computed trajectory, was now in the upper atmosphere at 47 kilometers altitude and descending. The SM-6 engagement was already in progress. The SM-6 assigned to the backup intercept acquired the descending, now ballistic, Khalij Fars re-entry vehicle. No longer maneuvering, its trajectory now predictable because its guidance was gone. At 31 kilometers altitude and 22 nautical miles northeast of the Nimitz's position. The SM-6's active seeker tracked the reentry vehicle through its descent and detonated its 64-kilogram blast fragmentation warhead in lethal proximity at 18 kilometers altitude. The warhead shredded the Khalij Fars' structure. The fragments descended into the Persian Gulf 19 nautical miles northeast of the Nimitz, close enough that the morning watch sailors on the Princeton's bridge, watching to the northeast, saw a brief aurora of incandescent debris catching the first hint of pre-dawn light as it burned through the lower atmosphere. 5 Khalij Fars missiles. 5 intercepted and rendered inoperable before a single re-entry vehicle reached the lower atmosphere with a functioning guidance system. The Nimitz had not been acquired by any Iranian seeker. Her hull was untouched. Her crew had been at general quarters since 4:04 a.m. and secured to modified readiness at 4:22 a.m. 18 minutes after the first TPY-2 track data had appeared in her CIC. 18 minutes from launch detection to all clear. The IRGC Aerospace Force's operational concept for the Khalij Fars against an American carrier in the Persian Gulf depends on 3 conditions being met simultaneously. The carrier must be detectable by the electro-optical seeker in the terminal phase. The carrier's defensive systems must not have sufficient warning to employ countermeasures, and the ballistic trajectory must not be intercepted above the atmosphere before the seeker can acquire the target. All 3 conditions had failed simultaneously on this morning. The carrier was actively employing countermeasures that degraded the seeker's acquisition probability. The TPY-2's 9-second-to-detection performance had given the defensive system over 10 minutes of engagement time before the first missile reached the exo-atmospheric intercept layer. And the SM-3 Block IIA had demonstrated, in 5 consecutive engagements above the Persian Gulf, that the Khalij Fars' trajectory was interceptable above the atmosphere with sufficient reliability to defeat the salvo. In Tehran, the IRGC Aerospace Force's operational staff was writing the engagement assessment that the Supreme National Security Council would receive within hours. The assessment would document the launch execution. 5 missiles, coordinated salvo, correct timing, and the results. 5 intercepts, 0 hits, the Nimitz continuing operations without interruption. It would address the intelligence question of how the American defensive system had achieved 9-second detection of the launches. A performance that implied the existence of a forward-based radar system closer to the launch sites than the IRGC's operational security protocols had accounted for. It would address the SM-3 Block IIA's intercept performance against the Khalij Fars' maneuvering re-entry vehicle, a performance that exceeded the IRGC's pre-engagement assessment of the interceptor's capability against this specific target type. The assessment would be classified. It would be read by the people who needed to read it, and it would document, in the specific clinical language of professional military after-action reporting, the gap between what the IRGC Aerospace Force's leadership had publicly stated about the Khalij Fars' capability to threaten American carriers in the Persian Gulf, and what 5 missiles had achieved against 1 carrier at 4:14 a.m. on a flat, dark, moonless night, when every condition for the operation had been as favorable as operational planning could make them. 5 missiles, 0 hits. And the Nimitz's morning flight operations commenced on schedule at 6:30 a.m., her air wing launching the first sorties of the day into the Persian Gulf sky as the sun came up over the Zagros Mountains on the Iranian coast to the north. The same mountains from whose slopes the IRGC Aerospace Force had fired 5 missiles 6 hours earlier. the mountains that now had nothing left to fire from the sites that had been used, because the after-action intelligence report from the TPY-2 and the E-2D's collection had documented the launch positions with sufficient precision for the morning strike package to include several of those sites on its target list. The Khalij Fars is Iran's answer to the American carrier in the Persian Gulf. The SM-3 Block IIA, the TPY-2, the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, and the Aegis cooperative engagement architecture are America's answer to that answer. The score at 4:22 a.m. on this morning was 5-0. The Nimitz flew her morning sorties. The Persian Gulf stayed open. Bye for now.